No, this isn't just another video about a book which was once obscure but is now quite famous. This is instead a video about its quasi-sequel. This is a video about ice, but more so, this is a video about Mercury. Anna Kavan's Ice was once obscure, pretty much read only by people who liked New Wave SF. Both Brian Aldiss and Christopher Priest were champions of the book. And it's a famous cult novel now, which is never out of print. There are 2 or 3 editions available in the UK, including a little mini Penguin SF classic. There's also the standard modern classic just there. This is the American Penguin classic. There's a Peter Owen hardcover in print. And in the States, I think there's a couple of editions as well, besides that one. It's a book which once people discover, they fall in love with. And that's just the Anglo-American market alone. Very few upper middle class female garden designers end up as drug addicts, but Anna Kavan was the exception. Photographs of this French-born Englishwoman reveal a delicate, genteel-looking woman, the mousy daughter of a wealthy, beautiful society lady who found her background rather overbearing, and I'll show you a picture of her a bit later on. Kavan was a born outsider. She was married and divorced twice and lost her only son in World War II. She was perpetually traumatized, and she started taking heroin, further attempting to redefine her fragile identity by taking on the name of a character in one of her early novels, Kavan. The theory is that she became addicted to heroin after initially being recommended cocaine by her tennis coach in the south of France, who said it would improve her swing, and she went on from there, as so often happens. Ice was initially entitled The Cold World, and it was a book which was written in the mid-60s, and it was rejected by Weidenfeld and Nicholson, who were originally going to publish it, because they got cold feet, funnily enough, and pulled back from it. And it was then picked up by Peter Owen, the avant-garde literary publisher, who issued a lot of Kavan's books subsequently and was a big fan of her work. And really, Peter thought at the time that the book needed revisions before it was published. So here's a quick description of Ice for those of you unfamiliar with it. It is in my book, 100 Must-Read Science Fiction Novels. There's quite a lot on the internet about it these days. But it's fundamentally a catastrophe novel in which the world is becoming covered by ice, and the narrator goes on a quest to discover this girl that he has fallen for, and he pursues her across a gradually freezing landscape. He's pursued, and she is also pursued, by a bureaucratic figure, and there are strange moments in the book where their consciousnesses seem to merge, and it's quite disorienting, and it's been seen as a metaphor for her heroin addiction, but it's also a really great new wave SF catastrophe novel, so I thoroughly recommend if you haven't read it. It's also a big part of the modernist canon these days, and it should be read by anybody who likes experimental fiction, though it is very, very readable despite its disorienting qualities. Wonderful, wonderful book. When Peter Owen decided to take Ice, he took it on the provision that it would have some rewrites and some excisions, and an editor took over, and he described Ice as a hybrid of Franz Kafka and the Avengers TV show, which is quite funny, and in a way it reveals that editor's unfamiliarity with new wave SF. And with catastrophe novels as such, especially Ballard's work at that time. But the Kafka comparison is very apposite. Her earlier novel, Eagle's Nest, which is now super rare and I used to own, really reminded me of Kafka's The Castle. Owen, who founded his company in the mid-50s, was already a well-known avant-garde publisher who issued the works of many people who had become a major part of modernism and who now are really famous authors. For example, he was the first person to publish Yukio Mishima in the West, and this is a Peter Owen edition of Confessions of a Mask. It's a sort of late 80s sort of reprint, and Peter signed that for me many years ago. And he also issued books like Herman Hesse. I mean, the Hesse stuff is all Peter Owen. And he also issued back in the 50s somebody who's really hot now, who was forgotten for decades, who I first read in the 80s, and that's Osamu Dazai. This is a New Directions hardcover, a contemporary one. But Owen was the first person to publish him in the UK. And, you know, he published lots of people who were up for the Nobel Prize. He was a very important publisher. Once the editing was done on Ice, it was retitled The Ice World. But Owen redacted the title back to simply Ice, as he'd recently published a book by Tage Vesaas, the Norwegian writer, The Ice Palace. This is The Ice Palace, which is now in Penguin Modern Classics. For years, a very obscure book. Vesaas was a poet and novelist. He was in line for the Nobel Prize, but he died before he became old enough to get it, because it used to be a thing that whatever country you were in, it was quite hard to win it if you were Scandinavian, because people would think, you know, maybe there's nepotism involved because the Nobel's a Swedish prize. And also it would be the senior writers who would get it, and he died relatively young. And I really recommend this. I'll talk about it at some point of the channel. I have shown it before. And at the moment there's 2 editions of The Ice Palace in print in the UK. And this does have kind of fantasy elements. I do recommend it. The only book it's really like to me is The Green Child by Sir Herbert Read, which I've done a video about on the channel probably about a year ago in my 100 must-read fantasy novels tranche. The Green Child, fantastic book, and I think that's out of print at the moment. But you can get this, and I really recommend it. Also, if you're on a Vesaas kick, I would also suggest The Birds, which, as you can see, is also available in Penguin Modern Classics now. It's the first time I can ever remember Vesaas being available in accessible form, which is really good news. When the editing process was finished and the material edited out of Ice was put aside, it was later published posthumously in the early 90s as Mercury, and this is the first edition copy of Mercury here. And I'll just have a look inside, and there's a picture of Kavan. That's from the Peter Owen archives, and I was given that to include in a literary diary which I edited back in 1998, and I kept it, so it's sort of tucked in. I'd forgotten I had it till I picked this copy up. So this is Mercury, and Mercury is the hidden face of Ice. It's the concealed dark half, and it remains obscure. It's out of print. It has been for a long time. I think it was only in print for a few years. There was a paperback with the same cover, so do look out for it. And it desperately, desperately needs a reissue, like most of Kavan's finest works. There are things in print. There are several things in print, but they tend to be short story collections and early novels and later discover novels, and not the real core, which for me is Ice, Eagle's Nest and Mercury. You could describe Mercury as a semi-sequel or alternate cut of Ice, and this is what I said about Mercury in my book 100 Must-Read Fantasy Novels, published back in 2009. Mercury is perhaps the purest distillation of Kavan's cool, unique genius. The narrative, rather like the narrative of Ice, of course, from which the book is excised, revolves around an almost transparent wraith-like woman called Luz, L-U-Z. She has a striking appearance, and she entrances Luke, who follows his opaque quarry across an array of peculiar imaginary landscapes into an oddly becalmed tangle of jungle. And here, the eerie cadences of the lemur's songs create a counterpointed echo for Luke's obsession with Luz. Both characters are desperate to escape from unsatisfactory paths composed of fractured relationships, but there is a danger in the siren call of the primates, whose haunting entreaties seem to indicate that Luke and Luz could end up preserved in the perpetual amber of an emotional fugue. Hallucinatory, rhythmic, and shimmering like the liquid metal that it provides its title, Mercury is both a metaphor for Kavan's damaged psyche and an attempt to communicate the cocooning solace of heroin addiction. It is also one of the most arresting and accessible surrealist fantasies ever published. In this edition of Mercury, there's a very, very short foreword. It's about a paragraph and a half, if that, by Doris Lessing, who apparently found Ice an inspiration over her novel The Making of the Representative of Planet 8, which is one of the Cannabis in Argos science fiction series. Interestingly, the phantom calls of the shifak, which is one of the largest lemurs, one of the largest species of that group, And we're already kind of echoing through the demi-monde of outsider literature in the early part of the 90s, because Serpent's Tail had published in 1991, I believe, this book, Ghost of Chance by William S. Burroughs. And again, this is quite a collectible. Burroughs, a Serpent's Tail, wonderful publisher. I remember buying this at the time, and a few years later when I bought Mercury as soon as it came out, it was really revelatory because there were obvious connections between the books. Both were heroin addicts, so it was interesting to see two books which focused on lemurs quite a lot from two heroin addicted authors. Now, I don't think Burroughs and Kavan ever met or knew each other, though would it have been a possibility? Burroughs was mostly in London in the 1970s, but he was around the 60s as well, so who knows? But I don't think there's any recording of their meeting or if they ever met, and I've got a feeling it probably didn't happen. So Ghost of Chance is a slim novella, and it highlights the plight of lemurs, who are now an environmental icon group in the fight against man-made extinctions and have been for a long time. And Burroughs, of course, is very enamoured of cats, and through the book he kind of drops his hard-boiled, snarling reserve in this very impassioned protest work, this polemic that nonetheless is comprised of his usual hallucinatory imagery. And Mercury is a very hallucinatory surrealist book, as I've said. So it's very easy to see the link between the two. And my theory is that probably Peter Owen knew Burroughs, so it is possible that he talked to him about ice and about the excised parts of it. So that is one possibility. Sadly, all of them are long gone, so I guess we'll never know. And there is a lot of mythology about Kavan. There have been two biographies. I read one of them a long time ago, and I sold it on. It was published by Peter Owen, and I saw a copy in Hay and Wine. It was £100, so obviously should have held on to it. There was one by Jeremy Reed, who's a great writer, who was published by Owen for a long time as well. So in their jungle settings, I can't help think again of Martin McInnes's book, Gathering Evidence, which keeps haunting me, and the whole damp jungle thing, which I've been on recently if you watch the channel regularly. There's more evidence there that everything is connected and that literature is web life. This is Outlaw Bookseller signing out for now. Try and track down a copy of Mercury. It'll blow your mind. Bye for now.